Big shout out today to UC Resolution for sponsoring Inside the Sale with Rob Schade. UC Resolution specializes in networking, collaboration, and unified communication, helping organizations integrate their data, networks, and communication systems seamlessly. UCResolution.com. We make technology accessible.
Honey, I don't know if we're ready to buy this car.
I guess you're right, dear.
Tom, Alice, what's holding you back? You keep coming to look at it every day.
We have looked at it 10 times in the last 2 weeks. But maybe we should come back another day.
You know, you could do that, or I could just block the door and not let you leave.
Well, I'm pretty sure you can't do that.
I can. I know you really want this car, and I think this car is the right fit for you. You've looked at it a ton. I'm just not going to let you leave until you buy it.
I'm pretty sure that's illegal.
No, you know what's illegal is you not driving out of here in that car today.
Well, when you put it like that, I guess you're right.
Welcome to Inside the Sale with Rob Schade, the only sales podcast that interviews real salespeople, real situations from across a wide variety of industries, markets, and verticals. Inside the Sale with Rob Schade. And now, here's Rob.
Wow, if only if it was that easy sometimes. Of course, I'm not advocating that anybody kidnap anybody to make a sale, but it's just kind of fun to think about. And so I'm looking forward to today. One of the things that I've always done in my career that I think has really helped me out a lot is I've looked at those people who are successful and those people that are consistently successful. You know, sales is an up and down game. Sometimes I've seen people that are really, really good for a short periods of time, and then they just have kind of a dry spell for a while. So my guest today has been one of those people that is just consistently successful. And so I'm really looking forward to introducing you all to Daniel and just talking through what Daniel brings to sales. So Daniel, welcome. Why don't you give us a little bit of background about how you got into sales? What was your sales journey?
Well, actually, it started back in the 80s. I was, born on an apple ranch and, went into farming with my father. That was my start in life, and kind of started out backwards, making really good money in the apple industry. But we sold the ranch. And so that put me at, hey, I got to get a job. Well, I always thought that I wanted to be in sales because I felt I had a gift of gab. So, and I like cars. So I decided, hey, I'm going to go sell Porsches and Audis.
Right. Not your like Fords, right? You went right for it.
I went for what I liked,
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's like,
I like that.
As bad as the car business was back in the early 80s, it was probably one of the best training overall for just prepping me for what sales is like. And I'll explain a little bit. It was, first of all, that was one of the worst industries. I'm not saying all sales was like this, but it taught me a lot of things. Being able to overcome situations. For example, the car business, people hated car salesmen, literally hated and didn't trust them at all. So my challenge is to be different, to make people feel I'm trustworthy. And it really paid off. I mean, people, I would be blatantly honest in areas to get them to feel that they could trust me.
Yeah.
And I found that as a good teaching lesson in life as far as learning to get people to trust you.
Why do you think car salespeople have such a bad name? I mean, is it that it's just so frustrating buying a car sometimes, or do you think there's something else?
Well, it was worse back then just because the whole industry was kind of untrustworthy. Well, we could go into some horror stories about what I went through.
Maybe we might do another show just on that. Yeah.
But to give you an example, and I won't say any names, but the cheating that went on. And, but I felt that I could do it differently. And boy, for a long time, it really paid off for me. I mean, I loved challenges. And I find I'm that way today. If I'm not challenged, I get bored.
Yeah.
So that's what I try to do in a sales. When somebody's saying you can't sell to them, that almost makes me really want to try hard. I mean, it does make me really want to try hard. So I just found that, like for example, they had contests. So Volkswagen came out with this new car sales contest. And so that month of the contest, I ended up selling 30 new cars in
Wow.
1 month. And that's a lot.
Yeah.
I ended up winning a Caribbean cruise for being one of the top in the nation. So uh, I just always loved the challenge. And so to me, to overcome the stereotypical, what people thought about car salespeople, that was a challenge to me. And I
I,
really
you know,
took
I
it.
like Yeah, I like that approach too, because I've always been a little bit that way. Like you have to give something to get something. And so a lot of times, like, they're expecting dishonesty or they're at least expecting you to hide something from them. But when you actually give them that piece of like real information or that piece of honest review, it opens up. And then I find that it becomes that it does open up trust and it becomes that kind of two-way street.
Yeah. For example, I'd give a little clue, like, say they were looking at a couple different vehicles, and I'd say, I'd stay away from that vehicle. I kind of feel it has these problems and so on and so forth. And so then suddenly they'd start to, wow, this guy's, he's honest. He's telling us the truth about that, and so on and so forth. So it
Next
worked.
thing you know, they were buying the 911.
There you go.
You can't go wrong with that. So you did that for a while and you were really successful. What was next? What was after that?
Got into the telecom. Uh,
Okay.
so when I finally got tired of fighting, you know, it, when they let me do it my way and be a good, honest person, I did really well. But when management started fighting me and wanted me to take advantage of people and do things I didn't want to do with my life, so I came across like during my several years of being in car sales. I probably saw a couple hundred salespeople come and go. That's how hard the business was.
Yeah.
And so I got to know this other salesperson, and he didn't last. He left, but he reached out to me and said, "Hey," he goes, "there's this, telecom company here that they're looking for a couple salespeople. I'm thinking about applying. Would you like to do that?" I go, "Yeah, I need a job." So the company was a small a branch in the little town where we lived, and so we went to Seattle to interview and ended up getting the job. So then I got into telecommunications and was in telecommunications, um, all that time.
Now, were you on the selling phone lines or were you selling phone systems?
We were selling phone systems, so that was the back in the days where electronic key systems was the big new thing.
Okay. Yeah.
Everybody, everybody still had the old 182 key systems. Now, granted, I was selling to small businesses, small, medium-sized businesses, nothing large like I got into later in life. But, I was just cleaning up left and right. Uh,
Oh, it was the
actually,
80s.
yeah. Yeah, and actually I ended up, basically owning the town as far as, my competition, even bigwig people from AT&T at the time from Seattle came over and tried to compete, in the area, and they gave up. They got frustrated because they couldn't compete with me. So I did really well.
What do you think that success was predicated on? Do you think anything that you learned from selling cars, did any of that transfer over?
The same thing. It was all drive. Um,
Okay.
when you're driven to, first of all, need to make money,
Yeah.
but also there was sales contests all the time, and I rarely said I liked being the best. I kind of look at life that way. I like doing well at something. So I just loved the challenge, and like we went through some hard times. I was selling Toshiba phone systems at the time, and that was when Toshiba of Japan got their hand slapped because somebody in the company had sold secret plans for a silent submarine
Mm,
propeller.
mm.
And so that was a big thing in the headlines. And so my competition would go around saying, hey, that company, you shouldn't buy it from that company. You should buy American. And they sold ComDial. So I actually bought a ComDial phone, one of their I from our company. I ordered one of their system phones. I opened it up, and one of the largest chips in there was a Toshiba chip.
Oh, nice.
So I said, yeah, they say buy American, but look right here. They even buy from Toshiba.
Yeah.
So I was able to overcome that. And then I also, educated myself on the situation. Found out that the owners of Toshiba Corporation, they had found to have nothing to do with it. They were cleared, it was an employee in the business, but so I educated myself to overcome the obstacle.
You know what I love about that story is that I've met a lot of salespeople over the years that kind of they buy in, they drink the Kool-Aid. Our product is the best thing out there, and the hype kind of overtakes it. And then when they talk to their customers, it's like that just kind of sounds like hype to them too, right? What I like about your story is that you didn't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to overcome it with more Toshiba. Like you did actually end up doing that, but what you did is you went and you actually looked at what the competition was doing. You went and actually spent time and invested knowledge, and then you found something that was like incredible, right? That they were using Toshiba chips. I think that's really, I sometimes think that's unique that to invest that much. So that's awesome.
Right. I feel that the more you're educated on a product that you're selling, the better you're going to do because you're going to be more confident.
Yeah.
And that confidence, it shows and it wears off. I mean, if you're a new salesperson and you're stumbling over, not knowing the product, I'm not saying you can't sell under those conditions. It just makes it a lot harder. And so later on, as I got into selling, maintenance contracts on big PBX systems, um, we were selling mostly to the Avaya world, Avaya PBXs. We were selling maintenance contracts on it. So I just educated myself on the systems. I learned what every card was. So when I was talking to a technical person that would throw out these things, I knew what they were talking about. And so
Yeah.
I found that made me trustworthy. And they figured, wow, this guy knows what he's talking about.
It's funny. I worked with a guy, and every time a customer would ask him a question, he'd put his hand over his phone, and he'd reach over and he'd say, "What does this mean?" And I would just kind of laugh, and I'm like, "Well, you've got Google right in front of you, right?
He's lucky. In
Spend
the old days, we didn't have Google.
Well, exactly, right. So you had to go and find the information. And so I do think product knowledge is really important. And that's one of the things that I like that you educated yourself on product knowledge. What about sales trainings? Did you ever do any sales trainings that made an impact in your career?
The companies that I was with had sales training. For example, Toshiba would put on sales training. So through the years, I took those. I never took any, you know, separate sales training. In the car
Yeah.
business, they give you sales training, and then Toshiba, like I said, would give the sales classes and stuff. And that's how I actually got to meet one of my future bosses was, back at those trainings. So it's
Okay.
kind of funny.
So is there anything, I mean, looking back now, do you have that like golden nugget that said, "Oh yeah, I learned this here or I learned that there," or did most of you just you learned because you had that hunger to learn and you learned it on your own?
I just think I was always learning. And, you know, one thing about my original boss in the car business, his saying was, "Hey, if you're green, you're growing, and if you're ripe, you're
Mm,
dead." So
yeah.
I just always was hungry for learning more. Like if I ran into an obstacle that cost me a sale, I would learn how I could overcome it. I accepted the challenge to want to find a way to overcome
Yeah. That's
it.
really good. So what about building relationships? Because I've known you for some time, and I know you're really good at that. So I'm kind of cheating here, but I'm letting all of my listeners know too, because that's one of the things that they ask all the time is like, can you train somebody to build relationships, or is that something also that is there an element of natural, or do you learn it?
That's a good question. I think it helps to have some of the natural ability. Now, to say that, you can add your natural ability. And I'll use the example that I was extremely shy growing up. And it's actually sales that taught me to be less shy. Um, so, in fact, that's one of the reasons why I always didn't like flat out cold calling,
Yeah.
because you didn't get time to build a relationship first. But on the same hand, that's why I became a great closer, because I was great at building that relationship. And just like I found out in the car business, I loved it. I loved it when I made the customer happy.
Yeah.
I had one little couple that nobody could sell because they kept getting interested, and then we need more time to think, and they'd leave. And so I just determined that no, I have a vehicle that would be best for them. So when they said, no, we want to think about it and leave, I actually went and stood in front of the door. This was a funny tactic. But I went and stood in front of the door, and they go, what are you doing? I said, I'm not going to let you leave. They go, and I said, no, I know you guys, you've been up and down the street, and I've been working with you for months and you keep leaving. And I know this vehicle would be great for you. It's it'd be a really good choice for you. And they ended up buying that day from me, and they were the happiest couple I ever sold. They sent me flowers, they sent me a little
Oh,
poem
cool.
about their car. So that just, things like that. And so the same thing in business later on, in big business dealing with large companies, is always just love building a relationship. And it doesn't have to be a real personal relationship. You don't need to get into their kids and all that. You just get them on a relationship where they trust you, where they're comfortable with you, where they want to listen to you.
Yeah, that is really cool. So you went from kind of having these one-on-one relationships in the car business, and then to more of a small business, medium business, selling in a local town. And was that largely like a single decision maker for the phone systems as well, or were you working with more decision makers?
It depends on the company. A lot of times there was more decision makers, like I'd sell an attorney group, so you'd
Hmm.
meet with all the head attorneys of that office complex, so on and so forth. And other times it was a single decision maker.
Did you find, like, I mean, obviously for a phone system, you can't say, "Hey, I'm not letting you leave until you buy this phone system," or maybe you did, but no. But did you find like that changed, right? How you presented to the customer and how you had to be able to guide them.
It did. I found that it wasn't that, the car business, you didn't want it, that you were taught never to let anybody leave. If you let them leave, they're not coming back. And that's what you're
Right.
taught in the car business. Where I found this type of sales, business sales, is more of a overtime nurture, stay at it, keep in front of them. You know, you don't want to anytime you let time go by without keeping that relationship fresh, you have a more chance of losing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things I was working with an AI company recently, and one of the things their solution says is that it will automate kind of that check-in, so that way you kind of are always checking in with your customer. And I was like, ugh, I don't know. I'm still struggling with that, right? Because I think that has to be motivated by the salesperson, and to build that relationship and keep checking in with your customer. I don't know how I feel about giving up some of that, right, to automation, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, to me, I don't know if the automation would take away from the personal relationship factor a little bit. Um, and maybe not. Maybe it can be tailored. Um, but to me, I find a reason for touching base with them, not necessarily just to bug them. I would, say, hey, I just wanted to say hi, and you had mentioned this in the past, so I wanted to just follow up on that, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because sometimes I think I'm glad you mentioned the part about the car business too, because I think people think that car salesmen like are naturally like this sleazy type of character, this great dime store novel, one-dimensional character, right? And it's absolutely not true. Like, well, I shouldn't say absolutely not true. It's not true in many cases,
Yeah,
but
correct.
but when I read that a while back. I was doing a sales training. And I read a while back that it's on purpose that car salesmen lead with their personality first, because if they don't make a strong connection in the personality phase, right? Like you said, the odds are if somebody leaves that lot, the odds of them coming back go down to almost nothing, right? And so
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
lead with your personality, and then you kind of show and build as it goes. But if you don't lead with you're not going to make that indelible impression right away. And
Yeah.
so that's where I think car salespeople do get a bad name, because they're trained that way to make that connection instantly. So sometimes it can seem a little bit over the top and a little bit pushy, but the reality is if you don't do that and if you're laid back, right, then people are going to leave even more, because then they won't feel like you're paying attention to them.
Yeah.
Right. So there is a methodology behind the reason why it's like that. And I've bought a lot of cars, probably too many over the years, but when I have that great connection with a car salesman, like you know that they're winning, that it's like Vegas. The house is winning,
Yeah.
but you're enjoying the experience, right?
Yeah. You don't mind so much.
Yeah.
Even in selling phone systems to businesses, um, you know, back then in the days, salesmen wore suits, and I like to think I was a sharp looking guy. And so I'd walk in with a suit, and there's times I walked in and maybe I was dealing with um, a female decision maker, and they would look at me and like, oh yeah, who do you think you are? And I could just feel a wall of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing is you got to learn to read your customers.
Yeah.
Um, so when I felt that resistance, I would almost I would react by being almost totally opposite of what they think I am.
Yeah.
So I'd be very low key, very humble in that situation. And it wasn't long before that wall would break down.
I really like what you've said there, because I think what I've seen a lot of times is that people aren't reading their customers, right? And that's really difficult. It's not a good sales experience when that happens. I'm not going to say who it was, but I was actually purchasing a SaaS system recently, and the salesperson was like literally kind of obnoxious. And so on purpose, I tried to, because I've been in sales for a long time, on purpose, I was kind of changing the way I was reacting to see if they would counter at all. And it
Yeah.
wasn't like their style was just right in my face, constantly
Yeah.
going. And as you know, right? I mean, I still believe in the kind of spin sale methodology where, if it's a big sale, the salesperson and the product often fuse in the buyer's mind, right? And so you think about the product the same way you do. So I really like that you said that, like read your customer, right? That's important.
Yeah. Too many, especially younger salespeople, start out with just, they've got the list in front of them, things that they should say, and they're just firing and they won't stop. They don't stop to listen. And I did that. I've done the same. So I, I learned these things through, trial and error. But and that's where being quiet sometimes comes in handy. You need to
Hmm.
listen to the customer instead of just throwing out sales points. Yeah, you throw out sales points in the beginning trying to hook them, but you got to know when to shut up. You really do.
Do you think being shy, yeah, see, just like me now, right? I didn't know, but sorry to cut you off there, but do you
No,
think being shy actually benefited that?
yes and no. Why I say the only no factor to it was being shy made me so nervous that I want to just talk.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
uh, so I had to train myself that that's not doing me any good. So I actually had to get some confidence to be able to just relax and listen to them, knowing that I could have some power if I pay attention.
Yeah. So, did you have any like great sales mentors over the years? And you don't have to name them by name if you did. I mean, so far what I've heard a lot of, which is great, is that you taught yourself, you figured it out, you spent the time. But were there any great sales mentors that came along that taught you anything?
I think there was all along the way. You know, I always would look and pay attention to who was doing good,
Yeah.
and what they were doing, and then when I got into, my last, big job in telecommunications, selling maintenance stuff, I just would listen, fashion myself after those above me until I learned and knew it all by heart. In the beginning, I was just mimicking what they said, but then it became a point of confidence with myself.
Yeah, so your path, you went from kind of individual one-on-one sales in the car business, then to small, medium-sized business selling phone systems, had a couple decision makers, and then you jumped to like large enterprise. Did your sales style change at all going up and working with the really large companies?
I believe it did. I had to learn, you know, it was tougher. You know, when you're used to small sales, it happens quicker, so on and so forth. So I think I had to, just get some under my belt to feel more comfortable. I don't think I was as comfortable. I don't think I was as confident because when you're calling this big enterprise company that has worldwide sites, it makes you nervous,
Yeah.
especially somebody like me. And so it took a while to build the confidence. And once I started selling, then the confidence started coming. And then I found it was to me, it wasn't a lot different once I got rid of my nerves and got the confidence.
So do you think building relationships at that enterprise level was easier, the same, harder,
I'm trying to
different?
think of the difference. Probably a little bit different, but a lot the same. I mean, it still comes down to the same tactics, make them feel comfortable with you. I was told early on that people buy from those that they like. And so that's something that I always try to establish.
Yeah. So have you seen the industry change from a business perspective? Like one of the things that I think a lot about is the CRM, right? That we're kind of coming out and maybe coming out of an age where the CRM kind of became almost too much, right? Everything had to go in there. Your sales leadership were kind of disconnected from the customer a little bit that I've seen in the industry, right? And they paid more attention to the CRM and the numbers that were coming out of it instead of individual sales and how those were moving along.
I
And
agree.
maybe,
It,
yeah,
it came to going by statistics, and a lot of it has lost the personal touch of selling. I actually feel that some industries today are missing the mark a little bit in not keeping some of the old-fashioned sales tactics.
yeah,
But that's my opinion. A lot of people would disagree with, but I don't see I don't see the results in some of that as much.
yeah. I think that's where, when I kind of I look at sales and what sales looks like in 5 years. My hope is that we're going to go so deep into AI and AI is just going to just fail, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
because again, buying needs, desires, wants, I mean, that's a human process.
yeah,
And humans like to be guided through very difficult emotional processes. And it was funny. One of the things I did an interview with AI recently, and one of the things that I asked it, I said, "What's going to happen when AI salesperson is also interacting with AI purchaser?" And it's just going to create this like garbage loop.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, no, I don't know if that's what's going to happen, right?
No,
But
I agree with just like history repeats itself. And you'll watch politics. Politics will swing.
yeah,
People get tired of it one way, so they'll swing totally the opposite, too far. And then they'll get fed up with it that way and they'll swing totally back the other way. So I feel in business it's a lot the same. I know that for the last company I worked for, got cut their teeth on offering customer service in a way that the big companies were moving away from.
yeah,
You know, Big companies were getting more automated and doing all this, and so customer service was lacking. And the company I worked for just was doing fantastic because of doing different. People were hungry for the good old-fashioned customer service. Um, so now it's swinging again with AI and everything to be more automate this, automate that. The company's trying to save a buck, so they want to automate everything, cut down on humans, so on and so forth. But I feel that eventually people are gonna get fed up with missing, the human touch.
Yeah. Yeah. I was at a company where we had a business leader who purposely created that high touch customer service environment. And, especially when you're in tech, right? Not everything works perfect all the time. As a matter of
Right.
fact, things crash, right? So you need an escalation point. Now, it's fine to get an engineer on a call and the engineer's working, but it is also really nice for the customer to have that high touch customer service person on the phone with them, explaining what's going on in practical terms and letting them know, hey, we care. And when I saw that disintegrate at this company that I was at before, I saw that disintegrate and they literally let go of a lot of people that were in those positions. It was like all of a sudden the company wasn't doing as well, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder sometimes if business leaders make that connection sometimes, or again, bottom line creeps in and fear of competition and things drives them to eliminate. But that's a philosophical question I think in sales we just need to keep asking and talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I know how I like to be treated, and I find that many customers like to be treated the same way, so it makes sense.
What do you do when you call into like a queue now and you get an automated voice? I mean, are you okay interacting with that, or do you demand well, demand might be a strong word, but do you ask for a human?
I find a way out. And the reason why is if it could solve my problems, I wouldn't mind it being automated. But
Yeah,
what I find, just like if my internet goes down and I call and get an automated thing that says, hey, restart your modem. Well, I've done it. Okay. I'm already past that point. And then if I say I've done it and so on and so forth, they say, oh, well, we can't help you. We need to get you to live. But well, yeah, that's why I'm calling.
right.
So generally I find ways around it.
As you look back on your career, what do you think the toughest sale that you had was, and maybe like was it maybe talk a little bit of detail? Obviously, not asking you to divulge anything confidential, but as far as like company size, what was the complexity of the sale, and how did you overcome that? Do you have that kind of story already?
Not offhand, 'cause I think I've had so many sales.
Well, that's a great answer for a salesperson, right? If you had, that's a good point. I stand I
I think
stand
a lot
corrected
of
there.
different sales had their own unique toughness.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the toughest things was getting used to selling to large enterprises. Um, you know, and then also learning a little bit of the political game you had to play sometimes with big businesses. That was a little bit different for me, where I'm a very practical, grew up very hands-on, practical person. I find that some of it, it was more about how they needed to do business and so on and so forth.
So yeah, so enterprise customers, there's a lot of complexity in there, and there can be legal, right? All these different things. So you didn't, there was nothing that kind of leapt out. Let's say tomorrow a young punk kid comes in. I'm just kidding about the punk kid, but you got to throw a little joke for the viewers. But some young punk kid comes in and he says, "Hey, Mr. Daniel, I know everything, but." I could use a mentor. What would you say to him?
Well, I don't think there's one answer to that. I think overall, there's a whole book of what we've talked about as far
Yeah.
as, you know, building the trust, learning to listen, learning to understand your customers, learning to see their needs. You know, there's a whole philosophy on that I feel takes some time to learn. I've ran into people that were great talkers. In fact, the guy that got me into the telecommunications world, the guy I met in the car business that said, hey, let's go apply for this telecommunications job. I tell you, that guy could out talk me. He could be so, I thought, so believable. Yeah, this guy had stories and just unbelievable, but he didn't make it. Um, so, you know, And then I've seen so many people that thought they could be a great salesperson, but not make it. So I had to realize, okay, what's going to make the difference? And to me, it was learning to train myself to be what I felt the customer wanted.
Yeah.
They wanted you
Yeah.
to listen to them. They wanted you to understand their point of view. Like, if you ever had that salesperson call you and, they're just so focused on their points, they don't listen to it at all. You're trying to tell them what your needs are, but they're too busy with their sales points. I think that's something that young, inexperienced salespeople it takes time to learn.
I had somebody tell me once that I was a chameleon like, and I thought that was like an insult. I was like, wow, does that mean I don't have a core personality? And then I realized, no, what I tried to do just in my everyday life was meet people where they're at. Not always meet people where I'm at, but like meet them where that. And that was something that I learned from kind of being a shy kid, right? Watching other people
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not, you see a lot of people. There's this other theory that in sales, and I'd like your thoughts on it. Um, Sometimes people just aren't likable, right? And you don't know why. Like you don't know why. I've met people in certain scenarios where, like, man, I don't like that person. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And later you're like, okay, sometimes it's situational. Like oh, you just like, especially with salespeople, they called it the wrong time. Do you think there's a likability factor in sales?
Yeah, but I think you can overcome it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've detected a wall between me and a new prospect. But then, to me, then the challenge is finding out how to break down that, how to make them feel comfortable so they're not built, so they don't have that.
Hmm.
And I don't know that you can always do it because sometimes you fail out of the gate and you never get started. But I think you can really try and you can change it a lot of times because I did.
So a long, very successful sales career, which is awesome. Like, is there, I mean, like if you had to figure out like what were one or two things that kept you in sales and attributed it to your success, like, right? There's always, because I think a lot of people think, I'm going to preface a little bit here, but I think a lot of people think like money's our motivation. And yes, money's a part of it. But I'd like to hear from you. Was it the money, or was there something else in sales that really kept you coming back to it and the success that you had?
I think it was something else. Just, just, I always had that drive, like I said, to be one of the best. And so, even though you got paid well, which was great, I just I loved succeeding. I
Yeah.
love beating. Like I said, when somebody told me that, oh, don't even bother with them, you can't sell them. Man, I would try harder, and many times I overcame that and I sold them because that was the challenge. I love the challenge, and so to me that made the difference. I just had that instinct to like to take on a challenge and find a way to succeed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So here's a tough question. I'm going to throw a real tough one at you. Um, was there a sale that you had that taught you a great life lesson, right? It could have been a win, it could have been a loss, but something that you look back on, you said, "Yeah, I remember that sale, and that one really changed my thoughts on sales."
Well, because I've done it so long, and a lot of it was taught in the very beginning. Um, but I think one of the things, and I learned this kind of in the beginning, and then it reared its ugly head later on in life to me as well. Don't get so confident that you count on a sale and give up on doing what you need to do to keep it
Mm.
until it's done. In other words, you know, a lot of people say, "Oh, I got that sale, so there's like no big deal. I don't need to bother." They kind of don't until you have a signed deal. But then I learned later on in life, even a signed deal can go backwards. um, I sold a one of my largest sales when I was down maintenance contracts on two PBX systems. A large banking corporation. Um, they bought out a whole another bank branch, and they brought me a proposal. I mean, the proposal was for maintenance on all this other bank name, all the branches under that name. And the cool thing was, and the exciting thing was that was just the tip, even though it was very large, it was just the tip of the iceberg of future possibilities with the large banking corporation that I was dealing with. So it was probably one of the most exciting to get into. All the time I was proposing it, I was sitting there counting the dollars, how much my income was going to go up.
Hmm.
uh, and, got it to the point of winning the sale, getting the signed contract. But then the CEO from the corporation I was working for got into an argument with them on commencing as far as the startup, the commencement day. Um, the banking corporation wanted to string it out over time and bring on, pieces at a time.
Yeah.
Where the contract said no, 30 days, and so the CEOs said nope, that's going to be 30 days or nothing. Well, this large corporation was smart enough and had enough attorneys. They found a way in the contract to get out of the contract completely. And so I saw a sale that was completely done go away. Now, part of it was out of my hands. Nothing I could do. That wasn't my fault. But maybe if I had prepped it, if I had known to begin with, and maybe prepped the sale to kind of make it work out that way. I don't know. I'd like to find a, I wish I could have found a way to overcome it because it was costly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things,
The question or not, but
yeah, no, it does. I mean, right? You've got to make sure it's not just a sales isn't just this one stop, one point along the path, right? It's the whole path, right? It's
exactly.
walking them all the way through. And sometimes that means things happen after the contract too, like that you got to keep your eye on, right? And I know that there's a lot of salespeople out there that I've met that just kind of turn and burn, right? They just, and that's
Yeah.
okay, but sticking with your customer and figuring out what they want all the way through the process, I still think is a really relevant way
Yeah.
to gain success, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm really encouraged by is I think a lot of people these days sit back and we kind of label millennials and we label Gen Z, and sometimes those things, those labels are there because they're funny, and sometimes they're there because there seems to be this ethos that's real. But one of the things that I'm finding is that a lot of them really they are looking for mentors. And so one of the things that I really liked about you, Daniel, is that you've always been a mentor to people who ask for it. And I think you've been a really great mentor to a lot of people along the path. So that is that again just part of who you are, or is that something you've learned?
I think it's part of who I am. It's kind of like when you're a salesman, you know something good or you like something, you're always pitching it.
Yeah.
So I think in the same realm, I used to joke about life is a sale. You know,
Yeah.
you convince your wife that you're worth being with. You're trying to prove yourself to your boss. I mean, life is a sale.
Yeah.
So to me, it's the same theory, that when you believe in something and you enjoy it, you're trying to sell it all the time. So that's why the same way you mentor other people in sales because, hey, this is your life. This is what you've enjoyed. This is what you like about it. This is, you've been successful at it, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Well, that's a great philosophy. I just, again, watching you over the years, I just always appreciated that. So great job, right?
Thanks.
You've succeeded. Yeah. Right. Well, Daniel, I really appreciated having you on the show today. And I'd like to have you back in the future and continue to share those nuggets, those gold keys to the sale. So hopefully you'll consider that.
Sure. No problem, Robert.
Yeah, it's always a little bit easier for me when I know the person that I'm interviewing, right? And I can kind of fill in the blanks. But hopefully, the audience today really gets a sense of who Daniel is. He's a great guy, and I've really enjoyed just being able to learn from him. And so, what were the keys to the sale for me today? Is I really liked when he talked about, he went in and sold cars, but he actually went and picked a car that he liked. And I think that can be important because we're not always going to pick what we sell.
We're not always going to necessarily use that product, or especially when you're talking about, huge, large sales, right? I'm not going to be the benefactor of it. But, if you believe in it, or if you're in that industry and it's a knowledge that you have, then you do tend to have, I believe, a little bit more confidence in the product and a joy to what you're selling. And that's really what the other thing I liked about Daniel is he picks challenges. And I've known that about him for some time. He doesn't shy away from something that's complex or difficult. And that's in his sales or in his career as well. But the thing that just absolutely I enjoyed today was know your competition. When he had that competitor that was bad mouthing his product and really trying to up theirs and as an advantage, Daniel could have gotten in this tit for tat conversation and bad mouth theirs and went and did all this stuff. But instead he went in, learned about the product, and actually found what was driving underneath that. And, turns out that it was actually their own chips that he was working for, fueling the competition. It's not always going to be that way, but I do think a certain amount of understanding about your competitor is always going to be better than bad mouthing them, right? So you can actually say, here's where I think that we line up, here's the differences, and here's where it's better for you. And I think that is a really big key. So thank you, Daniel, again for being on the show. And again, I also want to say I want to thank everybody for sending in their comments. InsideTheSale.com. You can go in there and you can actually just put in name if you want to be on the show, or the comments that have been coming in. I've really appreciated them, and I think it's all been really positive. So I'm going to continue doing the show because that's what the people want. So thank you.